One of the most enduring images of the Christmas story is that of the three kings giving their gifts to baby Jesus. You know very well how it goes. Three wise men, an African, an Asian, and a European, see a star in the western sky, which they then follow to the wee snow-covered village of Bethlehem, where they find a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes, whom they then worship whilst giving presents with bows on top. It's beautiful, it's politically correct, it works very well. The only thing missing from the scene are hipsters in segways, and we can have those too if we want. I hate hipsters. Pretty sure God hates them too. Anyway, right, let's dig in. Let's start with Saint Helena, the Empress of Rome. So Helena is the mother of Constantine, the emperor, who, as you perhaps know, wins an important battle in 312 AD, which gives him control over the western and eastern parts of the Roman Empire. And he attributes his victory in this battle to the Christian God. According to legend, he sees a cross in the sky or something. He thinks God gives him this important victory. And out of gratitude, a year later, in 313 AD, he publishes a thing called the Edict of Milan, which overnight Christianizes the Roman Empire, which is remarkable. 270 years previously, the whole thing starts with a carpenter being crucified on a cross. A few centuries later, the entire empire becomes Christian. Almost immediately, there is an obsession with all things Christian. And Constantine's mum typified the obsession. She becomes obsessed with the Holy Land, with stories about the Holy Land, and particularly with artifacts from the Holy Land. So in her later years, she becomes a bit of a 4th century Indiana Jones. For example, she claims to have discovered the cave where Jesus was born, and she built a church on it. She claims to have discovered the exact spot where Jesus was crucified, and she built a church on it. She claims to have discovered the exact location of Jesus' tomb, and she builds a church on it. She even claimed to have found the actual cross that Jesus was crucified on it. She sent fragments of that cross all over the empire, and you can still buy some of them on eBay today. And still today, if you go on holiday to Israel, most of the Christian tourist sites that you visit are based upon the findings of Saint Helena in the 4th century. Now, one of the things that Helena claimed to have found was the remains of the three wise men. Helena naturally regarded these remains as being important relics of the Christian faith, and so she had them interred at the Hagia Sophia, which was at this point under construction in the newly built city of Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul. Then a few years later, when she eventually died, her son, the emperor, as a favour to the Bishop of Milan, gives the bones of the three wise men to him as a gift. From about the 4th century to the 16th century, having important artefacts in the Holy Land gave you power. So if you had, for example, a fragment of the cross where Jesus was crucified, you would put those fragments on display in your church, and then what would happen? You don't need to be a rocket surgeon to figure it out. Pilgrims would travel to your church from all over the world. And when pilgrims travel to your church, what do they bring? The more artifacts you have, the more pilgrims you get, the more pilgrims you get, the more money you get, the more money you get, the more power you get. So Constantine wants to bring on board the Bishop of Milan. He wants to make sure he's behaving himself, so he gives him as a gift the bones of the three wise men. So Eustorgio takes these bones from Istanbul to Milan. The cart that he's carrying them on, as soon as it enters the city of Milan, it gets stuck in the mud. Eustorgio, ever one to turn a negative situation into a positive one, says, "Hallelujah, it's a sign from God." And he says, "This is this place where God wants me to build a church." So he builds a church, still in Milan today. It's called St. Eustorgio. and this is where the remains of the three wise men live for 600 years. Then in 1162 AD, a German king called Frederick I is fighting with the Pope. Pretty sure that's a sin, by the way. And goes to war with the Pope, captures northern Italy, and he takes the remains of the three wise men and gives them as a gift to the city of Cologne, where aftershave comes from. The city of Cologne then builds this gold box to house the bones of the three wise men. Here you see the German Pope praying before them. And then the city of Cologne think, well, we need a church to house the box that houses the remains of the three wise men. And so the people of Cologne spend the next 632 years building this Cologne Cathedral, in German known as the Dreikönigin-Kirche, the Church of the Three Kings. And so from 1100 AD to about 1700 AD, Cologne becomes probably the second most important city in Christian Europe. People travel to Cologne, particularly at Christmas time, to pay their respects, to pray their prayers, to give their offerings in the Dreikönigin-Kirche before the bones of the three wise men. It doesn't get more Christmassy or Christian than that. Now, here's where it gets tricky. When you have tourists coming to your city from all over Europe to see a tourist attraction, you need to have something to tell them. You need to have stories that sell offerings. And so the church in Cologne looked at the Gospel of St. Matthew, which is the only bit of the Bible that has the three wise men stuff in it, and they felt, perhaps rightly, this is a bit thin on information. There's only a few sentences. Our marketing department can't do anything with this. Our tourist guides have almost no story to sell. We need better information. We need better stories, because better stories give better offerings give a bigger cathedral gives us more money gives us more power, and in the Middle Ages it's all about the power. So they embellish the Christmas story. For example, the previously anonymous wise men are given names: Melchior, Balthazar and Caspar. They're promoted from the rather bland-sounding wise men into the more exotic-sounding three kings of the Orient. And then they're given elaborate biographies, beautiful ones. For example, it was said that after meeting baby Jesus, they travel to India and become priests, where they spend the rest of their lives working among the poor. And then at the end of their lives, they travel back to Europe and have a final reunion where they die at the grand old age of 100 plus after having a beautiful Christmas time reunion. Let me read you an excerpt from a Christmas calendar from Cologne Cathedral in the 1500s. This is what it says. Having undergone many trials and fatigues for the gospel, the three wise men met at Sebast in Armenia in 54 AD to celebrate the feast of Christmas. I think that's so beautiful. It's like a reunion, travelled all the way from India. Thereupon, after the celebration of Mass, they died. Saint Melchior, they got promoted to saints after that. Pretty good. Saint Melchior died on the 1st of January, aged 116. Saint Balthazar on the 6th of January, aged 112. And Saint Caspar on the 11th of January, aged 109. They became martyrs and were buried in the walls of Jerusalem. Now that's awesome. Completely fake. 100% fraudulent, but it sells tourists and gives you a ton of money. So there you go. Most of what we know today about the three wise men comes from the fertile imagination of the Cologne tourist office in the 16th century. Very interesting, but ultimately rather unhelpful for our lives today. When St. Matthew wrote this story in the 1st century, he had a specific point that he wanted to make to a specific audience. So what I'll do this morning is reread this story for you and tease out the specific point that Matthew wanted to make. Gospel of Matthew chapter 2 verse 1 says, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem. So the first thing we notice when we read this sentence is that the people who came from the east to visit with Jesus are neither three kings nor three wise men, but rather an unnumbered group of what Matthew calls Magi. And this is helpful information. We know quite a lot about the Magi. We know that they were an influential upper-class group of astronomers from the ancient empires of Babylon and Persia. Remember, this is the ancient world. People seriously believed that the fate of humankind could not only be read in the stars, but was actually determined by the stars. And no one in the ancient world knew more about this business of understanding the movement of the stars more than the Magi. And for this knowledge they were revered. And notice also that Matthew is careful to point out that these particular Magi come from the east. You see, there were astronomers and magicians all over the world. On any street corner in any city in antiquity, you could find a guy who for a fee could sell you some snake oil or a magic charm or read your horoscope. Some of them were good at it, most of them weren't. But everyone knew that when it came to the business of understanding the movement of the stars and how it affected the lives of men, the real deal was not to be found prostituting itself in the streets of Rome or Athens, but in the chart rooms and observatories of the East, in places like Babylon and Persepolis. And this matters for the story because Roman culture in the first century is nervously new. So in the first century, it's hard for us to appreciate this because to us Europe is old. To us Europe is where the history comes from. But in the first century, Europe is like North America is today. Roman culture is not new. It doesn't have any innovative ideas of its own, not really. During the life of Jesus, most of Roman culture was basically borrowed from Greece. And the Romans feel quite insecure about this, they feel quite nervous. And so the Romans respect anything that's old. They respected Greek culture, they respected Jewish culture, and they particularly respected the cultures of the Indus and Mesopotamia, because they believed that that's where civilization came from, that's where science came from, that's where life first began. This is what the Romans believed. And nothing about these ancient Eastern cultures was more revered and more respected than that of their ability to understand and interpret the movement of the stars. And what's fascinating about this to us as Christians, and also to Matthew's first century Jewish audience, is that to a Christian Jewish audience, Magi are pagans. They make a living looking at the stars and figuring out how the movement of the stars determines the fate of humans. We have a word for that in our culture: horoscopes, astrology. And we frown upon it within a Judeo-Christian worldview. I think I'm the easiest going pastor I know. However, if you were to say to me, Darren, I read something in my horoscope, I would be horrified. I would look at you like you had two heads. To us, in a Judeo-Christian worldview, that's a no-no. It is a pagan, naughty activity, and we don't do it, and we're against it. And in the first century, Matthew's Jewish audience were dead against it. It is prohibited in the Torah. You just don't do that thing in that culture. No first century Jew would have spoken approvingly of a Magi. And yet, here we are. Page 2 of the New Testament. Matthew seems to be telling us something. Something like, whatever this Jesus thing's going to be, It's not going to be religion as usual. Whatever Christianity is going to look like, it's not going to look like you think it's going to look like. Maybe, here's a thought, the wrong people will be in and the right people will be out. Maybe the people with clean stories that we appreciate and admire, maybe they won't make it. But maybe the people who've lived tortured, messed up, damaged, dysfunctional lives with messy episodes that we rightly disapprove of, maybe they'll be okay. Maybe they'll be in. Maybe in the gospel, right is up and whatever it is I'm trying to say. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Thank you, because I have zero clue. Which is exactly what Matthew's first century audience have at this point in the story. What is this? Horoscope dudes? This can't be good. This can't be right. Next sentence. Matthew notes that these horoscope reading pagans come to Jerusalem with a question, and the question is, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. Now, when Magi from the east show up in town and start talking about stars, you would sit up and listen, especially if they were to mention the phrase, King of the Jews. We, conditioned as we are by 2,000 years of Christian history, read the phrase, King of the Jews, and we immediately think about Jesus. However, in the cultures of the ancient world, the phrase King of the Jews was a well-known and well-used expression that referred to a futuristic king of whom it was believed he would inaugurate a new golden era that would change everything for the better. And this belief about a coming King of the Jews, it wasn't just a Jewish thing or an Eastern thing. All over the ancient world, people believed that a new king was going to come and would change the empire forever. For example, the Roman historian Tacitus, writing not long after the period, said this. He said, there was a firm persuasion that at this time the East would grow powerful and rulers from Judea would acquire a universal empire. The firm persuasion that Tacitus speaks of was probably caused by unusual movements in the stars. Remember, this is the ancient world. People seriously believed that the movements of the stars and planets determined the fate of humankind. In 7 BC, there was an unusual conjunction of Jupiter with Saturn. And then a year later, in 6 BC, there was an unusual conjunction of Jupiter and Venus. These were taken to be portents of change in the established world order. And because the planet Jupiter was thought to determine the fate of Judea or had something to do with Judea, everyone believed that big news was coming out of Judea sometime soon. The Roman historian Suetonius, speaking about this time, said this. He said, there has spread all over the East an old and established belief that it was fated that at this time a man would come from Judea to rule the world. Now the Magi probably acquired their fascination for this King of the Jews from an Old Testament character called Daniel. There's this book in the Hebrew Bible called the Book of Daniel. Long story short, Daniel is a Jew who gets gets captured by the Babylonians. He's taken to Babylon. He turns out to be pretty smart, works his way up the Babylonian corporate ladder, and at the pinnacle of his career, he finds himself being the boss of all the Magi in Babylon. It's a reasonable assumption to think that while he is the boss of all the Magi in Babylon, he doesn't just learn Magi stuff, he also tells the Magi Jewish stuff, including an old Jewish belief about a king who is coming, who will change the world for the better. So have a look at this. Book of Daniel, he, that is the Babylonian king, made Daniel ruler over the entire province of Babylon and placed him in charge of all of its wise men, its Magi. So that's 500 years BC. For 500 years, this class of Persian horoscope readers have been learning about the Jewish Messiah. And then in 7 BC and in 6 BC, they see weird stuff happening with the planet Jupiter, the so-called Star of Judea, and they think to themselves, this is it, this is it. This is the thing we've been looking for 500 years. And because they're looking for a king of the Jews, they naturally go to the capital city of Judea, Jerusalem, and they ask for the whereabouts of the newborn king. Fair enough. However, next sentence. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. That King Herod should be disturbed by the Magi is unsurprising. These are serious people. And when they speak about how the movements of the stars have revealed the birth of a new king, Herod would have believed them, and his belief would have filled him and his entire city with horror. One of Herod's jobs in the first century is to be a vassal king of Palestine. At this point, Judea is not a Roman province, but the Romans are in charge. And what the Romans want Herod to do for them is be strong and be tough and establish a buffer state that will protect the borders of the Roman Empire against the powerful Persians to the east. The Romans are very, very afraid of the Persians. There was a saying in Rome at the time, when the Persians tie their horses at the gates of Jerusalem, the empire itself will fall. So all of Herod's career, all of it, every decision he ever made, every dollar he ever spent, was always about making sure his borders were strong and that the Persians had as little influence as possible in Israel. The reason Herod came to power in the first place was because earlier in his career he successfully fought a battle against tribes who were sponsored by the powerful Persian Empire. I guess modern history in Israel is still the same. We still talk about Persian-sponsored terrorism and Hezbollah and all this stuff. The Romans were obsessed with this stuff. So Herod cannot have Persians having influence in his country. And yet here, standing before his throne, are a powerful group of Persian mystics who place kings on thrones, talking about the rise of a new king. And if a new king is rising, an old king is falling. And all who knew Herod knew that this old king would not fall alone. Everyone in Jerusalem knew he was psychotic. They all knew the stories about how he murdered his own sons, because one day he realized that after he died, his sons would become kings. And he didn't like that thought, so he killed them. Everyone knew how he had one of his wives murdered because she got too friendly to someone he was suspicious of. Everyone knew he murdered his brother-in-law. Everyone knew he murdered... Herod was a murdering kind of guy. The slightest suspicion that you were after his throne, he would kill you. And yet here you have a group of mystics talking about a new king. There's going to be blood on the streets. Everyone is filled with dread. And with murder in mind, we read in the next sentence that Herod called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law and asked them where the Christ was to be born. So this is classic Jewish stuff, right? What the intellectuals in Rome were calling a man from Judea who would rule the world, the Jews had long been calling the Christ, or the Messiah. So Herod's not religious. We know that about him. Herod is the king of the Jews, but he's not really a Jew. He's not into any of that stuff. So he doesn't know the Bible. So at this point in his career, he turns to the priests or the Bible experts, the Bible teachers, whatever, and he says, hey, those books of yours, do they happen to mention anything about a king of the Jews? Yes, they do. Do they happen to mention where the king of the Jews will be born? Why? I'm just asking. Well, they say the king of the Jews will be born in nearby in Bethlehem. Thank you. You're not going to kill anyone, are you? No? And what happens next in the story, to me, is fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. The people in this particular bit of the Bible who are answering Herod's question about the King of the Jews are Bible experts. They, unlike Herod, are profoundly religious people. By any stretch of the imagination, they are right. They are on the ups and the ins with God. They are able to answer Herod's question in a heartbeat. Without having to cross-reference it on Wikipedia or anything, they are able to say Bethlehem in Judea. And then they can quote off by heart the prophet Isaiah. But you, O Bethlehem, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel. And that is it. Which to me raises a question. The Holy Scriptures that you seem to know so well, the legends of your people that you and your forebearers have been teaching for 500 years, have spoken about this Christ figure, this Messiah figure, and you've literally just heard that this person has been born, and you are uniquely positioned to know that he has been born in Bethlehem. Would you not want to go and check it out? You know how far away Bethlehem is from Jerusalem? 6 miles. You could jog there in 46 minutes. At least you could if you were me. It's nothing. It's nothing. They could walk, check it out, and be home for lunch. They've spent their entire lives, personally and professionally, being into this stuff. It's the culmination of all of their hopes and dreams and aspirations. And it's just happened. And they're absolutely indifferent to it. Fascinating. The pagans who've spent their lives doing all the wrong things, they're desperate to find out about Jesus. They'll cross 1,000 miles of desert on a camel to see something they know little about. And yet the religious experts who live a short jog away have zero interest. This is the gospel. The people who are out are in, and the people who are in are out. Next sentence. Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go, make a careful search for the child, and as soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." I don't know, I guess everyone that says they're into worship isn't legit. Not everyone who says they're good are really good. After they had heard the king, they went on their way. The star they had seen in the east went ahead of them, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. So in Matthew's Gospel, happiness is a typical response to the Gospel. People discover Jesus and they are delighted to do so. The particular language that Matthew uses in Greek is exaggerated. He says in Greek something like, "They overjoyed with great joy abundantly," which basically means they were kind of happy. Their faith made them happy. They'd found an answer. It filled them with joy. On coming to the house, not a manger, they saw the child, not a baby, with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. And then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and incense and myrrh. So what's Matthew's point? I think that what Matthew wants us to do at this early point in his story is to do that thing we always do when we read a story or see a movie. He wants us to consider what we would do if we were one of the characters in it. You know how when you watch a movie you kind of subconsciously think, would I sleep with the beautiful Russian spy for England? Would I do that? Would I fly the aeroplane into the desert so it didn't explode over a population centre? Would I run into the burning building to save the cat? Which guy would I be? What am I in this story? Would I be antagonistic towards Jesus like Herod? Unlikely. Am I ever capable of being fake like Herod? Maybe. Would I be indifferent to Jesus like the Bible experts in the story? Would I be the kind of guy who appears to have it all together, who appears to be religious and right and good and true, but deep down there's just nothing there? There is no genuine joy or happiness anywhere in my heart. Is that who I'd be? Or would I be like the bad guys in the story? Like the guys who spent their entire lives doing it wrong. And yet after a lifetime of doing it wrong, I heard that one right thing and I went all in. And travelled across a desert in a stinking camel. And it made me happy. It made me happy. And then, that's the gospel at this early stage. We cannot predict who will make the right response and who won't. We can't predict how it will end for Jesus, but we get this inkling at an early stage that the screw-ups are in and the righteous are out. And then look at how this particular episode ends. Can you go back to that text? Yeah, thanks. So, look at the last sentence. I love it. I love it. They were warned by, what does it say? They were warned I'm not going to twist my neck. They were warned in a dream or something. Is that what it says?
Yeah.
Thank you. And then look at how he ends it. They returned home to their country by another route. Am I reading that right? Isn't that often how life is? I had this plan. And for reasons entirely out with my control, I could no longer go down that route I was planning to go down. Now I got to go another route. Now I got to take another path. Now I got to go another way. And that's okay. Because God is in all the paths. In all the ways. In all the routes. If God's just in plan A, I got nothing to tell you. But He's not. He's in the plan B's all the way to the Z's and all the way around again. And we're good with that. Thanks for coming. God bless you. See you next week.